About 2,500 years ago, the Chinese philosopher Confucius said, "In a country well governed, poverty is something to be ashamed of. In a country badly governed, wealth is something to be ashamed of." The great teacher understood the scourge of corruption and the value of transparency. As Asia comes together and richer, more advanced economies integrate with poorer, less developed ones, it is important that they all play by the same rules and all adhere to fair and open standards. Dealing with fair and legal business practices is an important challenge. A recent study found that corruption can cost as much as 2% of a nation's GDP. That's a significant number. The countries that have learned the importance of transparency prosper. The ones that put up with murky dealings don't. We owe it to ourselves and to our people to ensure this revolution is wealth and prosperity benefits everyone.
One of the biggest challenges for Asia today is to address the issue of corruption. For so many countries in the region, like China, like Indonesia, like India, everyday challenges are holding them back. This means petty corruption. This means a bureaucracy that really doesn't pay attention to the needs of their people. No country is perfect. The United States, the European nations, they have their own challenges with regulation, with corruption. But Asia, more than any other region of the world, has really the opportunity now to address corruption, and in doing so, really continue to lift millions of more people out of poverty.
Corruption is one of the biggest curses worldwide speaking. Often one doesn't like to talk about it, but the truth is it happens everywhere, in the north, in the south, in the east, and in the west. In emerging markets in particular, the temptation is there to abuse power, to get rich quick. And there are major efficiency losses associated with corruption, be it 2% or more than that of GDP. I'm not surprised at all. In some other countries in the world, that figure may be twice as high. It's a curse. It's terrible. It distorts incentives. It enriches those who abuse power, who usually are already in power. It usually is at the expense of the poor. The least powerful ones usually lose. It's also true that most everybody loses when it comes to corruption, except for those who are involved in corruption. They gain.
Well, as ASEAN nations continue to grow, the growth rates are exciting. We've been talking about some of the challenges in terms of those areas less developed, the importance of building strong education, strong healthcare. Equally important with that, for the future of ASEAN, for their relations with the rest of the world, for their business relationships, is building transparency, making sure that business dealings, government dealings are transparent, that they're open, that they create opportunity for everyone, their own citizens and others, that citizens have a strong voice in their government, that they know to keep their government, their businesses honest. So the transparency is really key. And we in the United States have been very engaged in helping with that. We know that's easy to say, it's harder to do. So we've been working, for example, with NGOs across the region to build strong local NGOs that monitor, whether it's environment, whether it's economics and business, whether it's government budgets. In every nation, it's citizen involvement that really makes that difference. And so if you have strong citizen organizations that work on this, strong journalists, you want journalists who investigate. This has proven effective everywhere around the world. One of the things we try to do as the United States is share those experiences. Take journalists from across ASEAN to talk with counterparts in the United States. How do you do investigative journalism? How do you check something out responsibly? Because transparency works on all sides. The journalists must responsibly investigate an issue. But again, they have a great role to play in making public issues, holding people accountable. We also do a lot of training officially in the United States with law enforcement. Because again, the transparency there, the ability to enforce laws, to have equal justice, to prosecute those who violate is equally as important.
No country is immune to corruption. If you look at the latest reports from Transparency International, even the United States doesn't do so well. It's 19th in the rankings. For Asia, when we look at the rankings with regards to transparency and corruption, so many countries fall at the bottom or the bottom quartile. This has got to change if Asia is going to move forward.
Asia is successful in many ways, but Asia does have a problem with corruption. Corruption is endemic and prevalent throughout the country, throughout the whole region. You'll find it in China, you'll find it in Indonesia, you'll find it in Thailand, you'll find it in Malaysia, you'll find it in the Philippines. So it's everywhere. But corruption in Asia is different than corruption in other regions. For example, corruption in Asia is seen, in some cases, accelerating growth, making business deals faster, so you achieve a lot more. Whereas corruption in India or Bangladesh or Latin America, some people think it actually slows down decision making, slows down production processes. So the greasing of the wheel in East Asia allows the machine to roll faster. But corruption in other parts of the world is seen as stopping the wheels from moving. So that's one aspect that's different. Now, is corruption destabilizing? Can it get to the point where governments fall and you have problems? And the answer is, it's been a factor. It was a factor in the Philippines when you had political change. It was a factor in Indonesia. It's lurking in there in other countries in terms of people's dissatisfaction with what's happening. It's a common complaint in many of these political processes, and candidates stand up and saying, I want to reduce corruption. Now, the interesting question people then raise is, isn't this going to be a vulnerability in China? Isn't there a lot of corruption or a lot of problems in terms of that kind of rent-seeking activities, misuse of funds in that country? And the answer is China does have a lot of corruption. But there is a distinguishing difference between corruption and perception of the senior leaders in China versus corruption and perception of senior leaders in countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, or other. And the difference has to do with the difference between Beijing, the senior leaders in Beijing, and the local leadership. And there's a little bit of difference between corruption in China and its influence on the stability of the country and corruption in some of these other countries where you often feel people saying, so-and-so, whatever, anytime you want to do anything, you must pay 5% to this person like that. And then after a while, everybody's in a chain, it's very, very linked. And then, of course, the top leaderships are always seen as having big bank accounts overseas, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a little bit of a difference between China and some of these other countries. But in a nutshell, the region corruption is not seeing as stifling growth as it is in other parts of the world. Whether it's destabilizing in terms of the top leadership varies across countries in East Asia.
The way to tackle corruption, being a systemic issue, is through a multifaceted approach. There's no single silver bullet. Yes, you need better laws, you need better enforcement, you need compliance, you need to make sure that the laws are enforced. But you also need a change of culture. You need to change the incentive structure, and that's where transparency and collective action, as we call it, is very, very important. The UN Global Compact has currently 5 major initiatives going on around the world called collective action against corruption. What it means is that a number of corporations work together at the same pace, in the same direction, to escape what economists call the prisoner's dilemma, meaning that no company alone can fight corruption, because if it does so, it actually suffers a disadvantage because the competitors, if not playing along, will actually gain from it. So how do you escape that prisoner's dilemma? The only way is collaboration, meaning working at the same time in the same direction, and where possible with public institutions, because corruption is both demand and supply driven. You have public officials often involved and you have private actors involved. So where do you start? You have to start on both ends at the same time.
Transparency is always a challenge for government, particularly one-party rule government. It's a very difficult process to let go of control of information and power. It's a slow process. It happens at different speed in different economies. I think China's actually done a fairly good job in terms of promoting increasing transparency. It has more things that it can do. The government in Myanmar, the new government is still very much new, and I think it's a work in progress. What's going to happen, we don't know. But certainly all the signals that the government's sending and its desire to engage with the global economy and the World Economic Forum activities there and things that are happening right now are very encouraging.
We live in a time when barriers are being removed and bridges built, where what separates us is less important than what unites us. We live in an era defined by cooperation, not conflict, and I'm fortunate enough to live in a region that celebrates community and respects diversity. The world can be a harsh place, and that's why you need friends. The world can be unkind, and that's why you need neighbors. Asians have always understood the value of community and the importance of sharing, and so could say ASEAN is a 21st century reflection of the ancient Asian tradition of getting along and helping one another. But it is more than that. It's good policy and good business, and it will change the world regardless if you're in the East or the West. This is Asia's time. This is Asia Rising.